Okay, so for today, we are going to start Unit 1 today. You have your new notes packets that you got last time. What we're going to talk about in Unit 1, the beginning of our actual Algebra 1 material, is going to be something called relationships and quantities. So we're looking at how one thing is related to another thing. In our next unit, we're going to talk about functions. So this idea that we can actually describe that relationship with an equation, with a function. That's where we're going to go. But before we can get there, we need to be able to recognize when I've got some sort of pattern or relationship happening. And then we're also going to look at some other kind of like basics to set us up for success when we get to that functions unit. So on the very first page of your Unit 1 notes packet, what we're going to look at here are identifying some patterns, some relationships in some different figures that we've got. So here we've got patterns made out of blocks. So in my first piece of my pattern, my first step, my first picture, I've got one block here. In my second picture, my second step or my second term of my pattern, I've got 1, 2, 3 blocks. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks. And so what we're going to look at today is different ways that we can be able to recognize and then use the patterns that we've got. So for some of us, we may be looking at these blocks and saying, well, I start with this one block all by itself, and then I add a block to the side and on top. And then for the next one, here's what I had, and I add another block to the side and another one on top. And then here's what I had before, and I add another block to the side and another block on top, okay? The other thing that may be more helpful for some of us is to look at those numbers in a little bit different organizational structure. So I could also say in my first step, I've got one block. In my second step, I've got 1, 2, 3 blocks. In my third step, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 blocks. And then in my fourth step, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 blocks. And then I might look at how these numbers are changing. If I'm looking at the picture, I would probably notice that we add 2 blocks each time. Who's noticing from that visual pattern, from the pictures, those blocks being kind of tacked on? Okay, some of us are more visual people. We like the pictures. Some of us like the numbers better. So if I'm looking at the numbers and I just sort of jotted down how many blocks are in each of these, I may have noticed I went 1, 3, 5, 7. So I'm adding 2 each time. Either way, I recognize that I'm adding 2. I just might recognize it in a different way. What I'm going to ask you to do today is to take a look at several different patterns. You'll always have sort of a visual pattern here, a picture to go along with it. And then I'm going to ask you each time how many blocks or squares or hexagons or whatever it is we're looking at, how many would be in the next step. So the one right after the last one that I gave you. How many would I expect to be in the 10th step? And how many would I expect to be in the 43rd step? So I want to take a look at this first one together so that we can talk about some strategies here. So if I'm talking about my block pattern here, my next step, how many blocks would I expect to be in my next step? I've got the 4th step. How many would be in step 5? How'd you get 9? Yeah. So if you're a picture person, you're going to say, well, we get another block here and another block here. That's 2 more blocks. That's 9. If you're looking at the numbers, if you're a number person, you might say 1, 3, 5, 7. The next one's got to be 9. So we'll have 9 blocks in the next step. Perfect. And now I want you to take a minute and think about how many blocks you would expect to see in the 10th step. So we've gone up through, we talked about up through, I should say, the 5th step. The 5th step is going to have 9. I want you to take a minute and think about how many blocks we could expect in that 10th step. There's not one right way to approach this. Anybody think they know number of blocks in our 10th step? 19. How'd you get 19? I kept adding 2. So if I add 2 more, that's step 6. Add 2 more, that's step 7. That works. How many people just added 2 until they got to 10? That absolutely works. Yep. Anybody have a different strategy here? Okay. So what you said is, I know I have to go 5 more steps, right? We know step 5 has 9 blocks. I need to go 5 more to get to step 10, right? And I'm going to add 2 each time. Well, how do we shorten adding a bunch of times? We can multiply. So we could take where we were at with our 9 blocks and add on the 5 more steps we need to go, where we're adding on 2 more blocks each time. That will work. So this would give us 9 plus 10, which would be 19. That would absolutely work. Now try step, there we go. Step 43. How many blocks would we have in step 43? How many blocks would we have in step 43? Could I add 2 a whole bunch of times until I get to step 43? Sure. That's probably going to take me a while, but we absolutely could get there by adding 2, just sort of keeping track on our paper maybe until we got to step 43. What might be another way I could approach figuring out that number for step 43? I've got 33 more to go. I'm going to add 2 on each of those 33 steps. So we know the number for step 10, so we can start at step 10. Okay, we've got 19 blocks right now. And then I've got to add 2 for 33 more steps. That would work. We also, if we wanted to, could count from the beginning. I know I start with 1 block. To get to step 43, I've got to add 2 42 times, right? This is step 1. I've got to go 42 more to get me there. That would work. You could also start from where you left off. That would be fine too, like we did here with the number of blocks in step 10. How many blocks should we expect in that 43rd step? What'd you get? However you approached it, you should have gotten the same number. I'm sorry, it's just hard to hear you guys over the air. What'd you get? 85? Yeah, 85. Now here's what I want you guys to do. We have some more patterns at the bottom of page 1, on page 2, and on page 3. So what I would like you to do now is take the next several minutes, work either on your own if you prefer, or with a partner, with a neighbor if you'd like. And I want you to answer those same questions for the patterns that you have at the bottom of page 1, and then on page 2 and page 3. So you're going through the bottom of page 3. Okay, I'm going to leave our little notes up here from problem A, but I want you to finish page 1, page 2, and page 3. Okay, there are different strategies you could take for each of these. You may find that for a particular problem, the strategy you used for A works really well, but for a different problem, you maybe need to use a strategy somebody else used. So if you were looking at the pictures, maybe you need to shift gears to the numbers or vice versa. If you get stuck, that's okay. Don't stay stuck, move on. So if you get stuck on problem D, move on to problem E, okay? If you get stuck, don't stay stuck, move on. Again, you can work with someone if you would like, and then we'll catch up in a few minutes, okay? Again, you're answering those same questions. How many in the next step? How many in the 10th step? and how many in the 43rd step? You're saying we're adding 4 each time, right? Okay. And then for this last one, or like to get to the 10th step here, you are saying like basically you start with nothing. You need to add 4 to nothing, but you are starting with it. You need to take the 5 away. You could do 9 here, like the amount you start with plus 9 times 4 to get you the 10th step. And like do 42 here times 4 plus the 5. That would be 2 here. You have an amount that you're starting with. Does that make sense? Okay.
Multiplying that? No, 6 is 12. 12.
Remember, if you get stuck, it's okay to move on. It's okay to skip. You can always come back to it. Okay. So what numbers are there?
Please.
We added 4 here, we added 6 here.
No. I'm kidding. What?
We added 4, we added 6. Yeah.
Now we got
For the first one.
Oh, you have to add. Okay, so we're talking about what we added, all the numbers down, right? So we said we added 4, and then we added 6. So what do you think is the best? I'm just going to get my
It's just.
I'm trying to do it.
What'd you get? Sort of good. I think.
Few more minutes and we'll talk about these. Yeah. Make it squares and sides together. One by one. And then here, third step, 3 by 3.
Okay, I'm gonna try to get out. You don't need that. 4 by 4 would be 16.
And then 4 more. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
don't know. What are you thinking? No, I read sections on the lines on the outside.
Okay, you guys, let's bring it back together. I've heard a lot of good discussions, a lot of good conversations. Let's take a look at B. What's happening with B? What's going on here? What's the pattern? I'm adding 4, right? I start with this shape that's got 5 squares to it, and then I add onto each corner. So I'm going to add 4 each time. We add 4 squares each time. And then the next one, I add on to the corners again. Okay. So if I'm keeping track, I know some of you jotted down how many things I have in the pattern underneath your shape. So we had 5 things, and then we had 9 things, and then we had 13 things. How many squares would I expect in the next step? 17, yeah, just a little louder for me. It's hard to hear you over the air. It's pretty noisy. So we'd have 17 things in the next step, right? 13 plus 4 would give me 17 things. How about in the 10th step? What? Anybody get something different for the 10th step? I got 41 as well. So we've got 5 more steps to go. If we use that same strategy from up here, we're at 17. We've got 5 more steps to go. We're going to add 4 for each of those 5 steps. This would be, oh, what did I miss here? Oh, that's not 5 more steps. That's why we'd have 6 more steps to go. There we go. Since we would only be to the 4th step here, we'd have 6 more to go to get to 10. So that'd be 17 plus 24. Okay. That is something that I've noticed through all my sections of Algebra 1. If we use the same sort of little like equations or expressions that we've written for earlier problems, we need to make sure we update them. So I'm adding 4 instead of 2, so I had to change that part. Here I had 5 more steps to go. Now I've got 6 more steps to go. Okay, so that would get me 41 to the 10th step. And then how about for step 43? How many squares in step 43? How many squares in step 43 for B? $173. On the next page. Who had a little trouble with C and D? Okay. These were probably the trickiest ones that I gave you because if I looked at how many squares are in each of these pictures, this guy has 2 squares. There would be 4, 5, 6 squares. There's 3, 6, 9, 12 squares. I can't add the same thing each time. So for the people that asked for a little assistance on these, some of us looked at how you got from 2 to 6, and we said, well, you add 4. And then how do you get from 6 to 12? Well, I add 6. So what do you think I would add the next time to get to the next step? 4, 6, 8. Yeah, I'm changing this number. I'm adding something each time, but what I add changes. That makes this a little tricky. There's another way that we could think about this problem that doesn't rely on this changing addition. That's the part that gets tricky here when the amount I add changes. There's another way I could have thought about this, and that was to look at the like visual pattern, to rely more on that. So it's a little difficult to see with figure 1 or step 1, but if I look at step 2, can you see how these darker shaded blocks form a square, right? I've got a square here out of these blocks. The dimensions of this square are 2 by 2, and then I add on 2 of those lighter shaded blocks. So for step 2, I've got a 2 by 2 square. plus 2. So 2 by 2 would give us 4 plus 2 gets us that 6. For step 3, my big block here is 3 by 3, right? 3 blocks by 3 blocks. That gives me 9 plus another 3 would get me 12. And that might make it a little bit easier to find those future terms. If I hop back to my first one, I've got a 1 by 1 block here plus 1. So this would be 1 plus 1 to get my 2. So my next step I would expect to be a what? What would the picture look like? What would the picture look like is the question that I asked. It would, yeah, be 4 by 4. 4 by 4 plus 4. So that would give us 20, right? 4 by 4 is 16 plus 4 is 20. How about the 10th step? What would the picture look like? For the 10th step, what would the picture look like? Yeah, it would be a big 10 by 10 block and then 10 off to the side, which would give us 110 squares. How about the 43rd step? How many squares would we have? A whole bunch, right? 1,892 squares in that one. A lot. D was another one that was a little tricky. What do we see for D? So you use the dimensions of the rectangle that you got? Sort of, kind of 1 by 2, 2 by 3. That's what I'm hearing. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so what I want you to notice from here is that the step we're on tells us the sort of width and then add 1 to get the height for this big rectangle that I've got. So step 1 is 1 by 2, step 2 is 2 by 3, step 3 is 3 by 4. You told me my next step I would expect to be 4 by 5. So 4 by 5 would be 20. How about the 10th step? What would that one look like? 10 by 11. So how many squares would be in that 10th step? 110. Do these values look familiar? They should, right? We had them from the last one. And in fact, my squares are shaded all the same. The like setup's a little bit different, but it's the same pattern. I started with 2, and then we added 4, and then we added 6, and then we added 8. It's the same pattern represented a little bit different. So how many squares would I expect in that 43rd step? How many squares in the 43rd step here for problem 2? Same as the last one, right? 1,892. Okay, turn the page for me. Our last couple. These were hopefully less terrible than the ones on page 2. We've got some figures this time. So for problem E, we're starting with a pentagon, and we'll have 5 sides for a pentagon. And then we're just kind of sticking more pentagons on, right? We're just sticking them on to the side. So the orientation of our pentagon shifts a little bit, but we've got the same shape. So here's my pentagon that I started with that had 5 sides. They're sharing this one. They're sort of glued together at that side. And then I'm adding 1, 2, 3, 4 sides. So I'm going to add 4 sides here for a total of 9 sides or segments. And then for the 3rd step, I tack on another pentagon. So here are the 9 sides or segments I had before. And then we're adding 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sides. 9 plus 4 means we've got 13 total sides here. So how many segments would I expect for that next step? I'm going to stick another pentagon on. So we would have, 17. So add 4, and that would give us 17. Now, how about the 10th step? What did we get for the 10th step? Sorry. Close. I got 41. So if we look, we started with, or actually, we'll go from here. We had 17 sides, and we need to add 4 sides. This is step 4, so we need to add 6 more steps. Okay, so this would be 17 plus 24. That would get us 41. Or if we wanted to count from the beginning, I started with 5, and then I'm going to add on 4 9 times to get to the 10th step. Right? I started here. I need to go 9 more. That would be 5 plus, this would be 36, which would also give me 41. How about for the 43rd step? What would I have? What was that? Sorry. Yeah, 173. Do these values look familiar? They should. I'll come back here in just a second. But this is the same as problem B. Now, the picture is completely different. We were looking at arrangements of blocks in problem B, but we still started with 5 things and added 4 things each time. That's the same pattern. So it should make sense. I got the same values here. Okay. And so to find that 43rd step, I know we've done this a couple times for that 10th step, but if I were looking for the 43rd step, I could work from the 10th step. Say I've got 41. I want to add 4. And to get to the 43rd step, I've got to go 33 more. That would work. You could also, if you wanted to, start from the first step and say I've got to add 4 42 times. I've got step 1 here. I need to go 42 more. Both of those would get you to 173. And then how about problem F? A little bit different picture this time. I've got a pentagon with a square stuck to the side of it. So I'm starting with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Starting with 8 segments. And then here's what I started with. Stick on another square. So I would get 1, 2, 3 new sides. So I've got 11 sides here. And then again, add 3 new sides for that next square. So when I add 3, I have 14 sides. How many segments would I have in the next step? Add on 3, I would get 17. So my next one would have 17 segments. How about that 10th step? How many segments for that 10th step? 35. And then finally, how about the 43rd step? 134. Now you could, if you had your calculator out, just keep adding 3 until you got there. We talked about that at the beginning of class. Or you could use one of these sort of shorthand versions of that, where we rewrite all that repeated addition as multiplication. The big idea here is that we're recognizing these patterns and then applying them, okay? So next time we're gonna take a look at a refresher on some of our graphing skills. So remembering what the coordinate plane looks like and how we label axes and how we determine what should go where when I'm graphing some data. So that's what we're gonna talk about next. Okay, that's it for today. Again, make sure you bring your packet every day so that you know, or that you have your materials with you.